The sun beat down on Main Street like a hammer on an anvil, turning Red Hollow into a shimmering haze of dust and sweat. Caleb Rourke stood in the middle of it all, jaw tight, fists tighter, hating every second of this circus. Sheriff Dixon had that grin plastered across his face, the one that said he was enjoying this way too much. Come on now, Rourke. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. The decree's the decree. No wife, no deed. Simple as that. Simple, Caleb muttered, his voice rough as gravel. Nothing about this is simple, Dixon, and you damn well know it. But the law was the law, or at least that's what they called it when powerful men wanted something. In this case, it was Victor Hale who wanted it, wanted Caleb's land, wanted him gone, wanted the whole valley cleared out for whatever scheme he was running. And Dixon, well, Dixon was just a dog on a leash. The crowd had gathered like vultures. Half the town showed up for the spectacle, and the other half wished they had. Women lined up along the boardwalk, some preening, some nervous, all of them eyeing Caleb like he was a prize bull at auction. He wasn't. He was tired. Tired of this town, tired of the games, tired of the weight pressing down on his shoulders every single day since his brother died and left him holding a ranch that felt more like a curse than a gift. Pick one, Rourke, someone shouted from the crowd. Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Caleb's gaze swept across the women. There was Mary Pritchard, the banker's daughter, all lace and perfume and practiced smiles. She'd make a fine politician's wife, he thought bitterly, but not a rancher's. Beside her stood Lorraine Nash, a widow with sharp eyes and sharper ambitions. She'd have him selling cattle to her cousins within a month. Then there was Dahlia Kern, red-haired and bold, leaning against a post like she already owned him. She probably thought she did. They'd shared a drink once, maybe twice. That didn't mean anything, but the way she looked at him now said she thought it did. He hated all of it. This is a joke, Caleb said, loud enough for Dixon to hear. Joke or not, you're playing, Dixon replied. Clock's ticking. Victor Hale stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching with the cold satisfaction of a man who'd already won. He didn't need to say anything. His presence said it all. Choose wrong, Rourke, and I'll bury you. Caleb's hands flexed at his sides. He could walk away. He could lose the ranch, lose everything, and ride out of here with nothing but his horse and his pride. Part of him wanted to. Part of him was so tired of fighting that giving up felt like relief. But the other part, the part that remembered his brother's blood soaking into the dirt, the part that remembered every callus, every scar, every sleepless night spent keeping that ranch alive, that part refused. He wasn't going to let Hale win. His eyes drifted past the lineup, past the eager faces and the whispered bets, and landed on someone standing in the back. Hannah Vale. She wasn't part of the lineup. She was barely part of the crowd. She stood near the corner of the general store, half hidden behind a stack of crates, flour dusting her dark dress, her hair pulled back in a braid that had come loose hours ago. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't looking at anyone. She was staring at the ground like she wished it would swallow her whole. Caleb knew her. Not well. No one really knew Hannah. She worked at the boarding house, cooked meals for travelers, kept her head down, kept her mouth shut. There were rumors. Something about a husband who died, something about shame she carried like a second skin. People talked, but Hannah never did. She was invisible. And that, Caleb realized, was exactly what he needed. Her, he said. The crowd went silent. Dixon blinked. What? Caleb pointed. Hannah Vale. I choose her. Every head turned. Hannah's included. Her face went pale, then red, then pale again. She looked like she'd been slapped. You can't be serious, Dixon said, his grin faltering. Dead serious. Laughter erupted, loud, cruel, disbelieving. Someone in the crowd shouted, The cook? You're picking the cook? She's not even pretty, another voice called out, followed by more laughter. Caleb's jaw clenched, but he didn't take his eyes off Hannah. She was shaking her head, backing away, her hands twisting in her apron. I didn't, she started, her voice barely audible. I'm not, you don't have to be anything, Caleb said, cutting through the noise. Just say yes or no. Hannah stared at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. He didn't know her. She didn't know him. This was insane. But insane was better than predictable, and predictable was exactly what Hale wanted. Say no, Hannah, someone shouted. Save yourself the embarrassment. More laughter. Hannah flinched. Caleb took a step toward her, ignoring the crowd. I'm not asking you to love me, he said, quieter now, just for her. I'm asking you to help me. 1 year. That's all the decree requires. After that, you're free. I'll give you money, land, whatever you need. But right now, I need an answer. Hannah's eyes were wide, her breathing shallow. She looked trapped, cornered, and Caleb hated that he was the one doing it to her. But he also saw something else in her eyes, something flickering beneath the fear. Anger. Not at him, at them, at the crowd that laughed, at the town that dismissed her, at the life that had beaten her down so many times she'd stopped trying to stand. Why me? She whispered. Caleb's voice was steady. Because you're the only one here who doesn't want something from me. Hannah's breath hitched. For a long moment she didn't move. The crowd held its breath, waiting for her to bolt, to refuse, to confirm every cruel thing they'd ever thought about her. But then something shifted in her expression. Her shoulders straightened, her chin lifted. Yes, she said. The word was quiet, but it cut through the laughter like a blade. The crowd erupted again, shock, outrage, disbelief. Dixon looked like he'd swallowed a hornet. Victor Hale's face went cold and hard. Caleb didn't smile. He just nodded. All right then. Hannah stood there, trembling, her hands still twisting in her apron, looking like she might collapse or scream or run. But she didn't. She stayed. And Caleb realized he might have just made the biggest mistake of his life, or the smartest decision he'd ever made. He couldn't tell yet. The ceremony was a farce. Judge Alcott stumbled through the words, whiskey-breathed and impatient, while the crowd muttered and whispered behind them. Caleb stood stiff as a post, and Hannah looked like she was attending her own funeral. Do you take this woman? Alcott squinted at a smudged piece of paper. Hannah Vale. To be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Caleb said. And do you... Alcott turned to Hannah, looking vaguely confused that she was still there. Do you take this man, Caleb Rourke, to be your lawfully wedded husband? Hannah's voice was barely a whisper. I do. Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you man and wife. You can kiss her if you want, I guess. Caleb didn't. Neither did Hannah. They just stood there, staring at each other like strangers forced into the same jail cell. Congratulations, Dixon said from the sidelines, his tone dripping with mockery. Hope you two are real happy together. Caleb ignored him. He turned to Hannah. We're leaving. She nodded, mute. They walked through the crowd together, separately really, while whispers followed them like flies. Caleb's horse was tied up near the saloon. He untied it, glanced at Hannah. You got anything you need to bring? A bag, she said quietly. At the boarding house. Go get it. I'll wait. Hannah hesitated, then nodded again and disappeared into the building. Caleb stood there, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on his back. He didn't turn around. Didn't acknowledge any of them. Victor Hale stepped into his line of sight. That was a bold move, Rourke, Hale said, his voice smooth as oil. Unexpected. Wasn't trying to impress you. Hale smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. No, I suppose you weren't. Still, I have to wonder, what's a man like you going to do with a woman like her? That's not your concern. Everything in this valley is my concern. Hale's smile faded. You think marrying some broken-down cook is going to save you? It won't. The decree buys you a year. After that, I'll still be here, and you'll still be in my way. Caleb's hand drifted toward the revolver at his hip. You threatening me, Hale? Just stating facts. Hale tipped his hat. Enjoy your honeymoon, Rourke. Something tells me it's going to be short. He walked away, boots clicking on the boardwalk, leaving Caleb standing there with his jaw clenched and his pulse hammering. Hannah reappeared a few minutes later carrying a small, battered satchel. She looked even smaller now, even more lost. Ready? Caleb asked. She nodded. He helped her onto the horse. She climbed up behind him, stiff and awkward, and then they rode out of Red Hollow without a word. But the ranch was 2 hours northwest, tucked into a valley where the wind cut like a knife, and the grass grew stubborn and wild. It wasn't much to look at. A house, a barn, a few outbuildings, But it was solid. It had good bones. Caleb's brother had built it with his own hands, and Caleb had kept it standing after he was gone. Hannah didn't say anything as they rode up. She just stared at it like she was trying to figure out if it was real. "This is it," Caleb said, dismounting. He offered her a hand. She took it, slid down, and immediately put distance between them. "There's a room inside," Caleb said. "Used to be my brother's. You can have it." "Where will you sleep?" "Main room. I've got a cot." Hannah nodded, looking relieved. "There's 3 ranch hands," Caleb continued. "They live in the bunkhouse. Good men. They won't bother you. I'll make sure of it." "All right. You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Caleb added, his voice softer now. "I meant what I said. This is business, nothing more." Hannah finally looked at him, really looked at him. Her eyes were dark, guarded, but there was something else there too, something tired. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I figured you'd understand." "Understand what?" "That sometimes you don't get to choose your life, you just get to survive it." Hannah's face flickered with something. Recognition, maybe. Pain. She didn't respond, just turned and walked toward the house, her satchel clutched tight. Caleb watched her go, then turned to unsaddle the horse. He had no idea what he'd just done, but there was no going back now. The first night was silent. Hannah stayed in the small bedroom, door closed, while Caleb sat by the fire in the main room, staring into the flames and wondering how long it would take for this whole thing to fall apart. The ranch hands, Tom, a grizzled man in his 50s, young Billy, barely 20, and Marcus, quiet and steady, had taken the news with varying degrees of surprise. Tom had just grunted. Billy had stared wide-eyed. Marcus had nodded once and gone back to work. None of them asked questions. That was one thing Caleb liked about them. They didn't pry. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. Hannah stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl, looking hesitant. "Couldn't sleep?" Caleb asked. "Not used to it being this quiet," she admitted. Caleb gestured to the other chair near the fire. "Sit if you want." She did, slowly, perching on the edge like she might need to run at any moment. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. "I know people think I'm pathetic," Hannah said suddenly. Caleb glanced at her. "I don't. You don't even know me. Neither do they." Hannah's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "That's fair." "Why'd you say yes?" Caleb asked. "Back in town. You could have walked away." Hannah stared into the fire. "I'm tired of being invisible," she said quietly. "I'm tired of being the punchline. I thought, maybe this is my chance to be something else, even if it's just for a year." Caleb nodded slowly. "Then let's make it count." Hannah looked at him, surprised. "I don't know how this is going to go," Caleb continued, "but I'm not going to let anyone treat you like a joke, not here, not on my land." Something in Hannah's expression softened, not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. "Thank you," she said. Caleb shrugged. "Don't thank me yet. This place isn't easy, and Hale's not going to let up." "Who is he? Really?" "A man who wants what I have, and he'll do whatever it takes to get it." Hannah's jaw tightened. "Then we'll have to make sure he doesn't." Caleb looked at her, startled. There was steel in her voice now, faint but real. Maybe she wasn't as broken as everyone thought. Maybe neither of them were. A mess. The next morning, Hannah woke before dawn. She moved through the house quietly, finding the kitchen, starting a fire in the stove. She didn't know what else to do. Cooking was the one thing she'd always been good at, the one thing that made sense. By the time Caleb stumbled in, bleary-eyed and half awake, the smell of coffee and biscuits filled the room. He stopped in the doorway, staring. "You didn't have to—" "I know," Hannah said, "but I wanted to." Caleb sat down, still looking confused, and took the plate she handed him. He ate in silence, but she saw the way his shoulders relaxed, the way his expression softened. "This is good," he said finally. "Thank you." When the ranch hands came in for breakfast, cautious, unsure, Hannah served them too. They ate like men who hadn't had a real meal in months. Tom actually smiled. "Ma'am," Tom said, tipping his hat. "That was mighty fine." Hannah felt something warm bloom in her chest. Not pride, exactly, but close. For the first time in years, she felt useful. But not everything was easy. Later that week, a man rode up to the ranch, one of Hale's men, slick and smug, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Rourke," he said, tipping his hat, "Mr. Hale sent me to congratulate you on your marriage." "Tell him thanks," Caleb said flatly. "Now, get off my land." The man's smile widened. "He also wanted me to remind you, the offer still stands. Sell now, and you walk away with enough money to start fresh somewhere else." "Not interested." "Shame." The man's eyes drifted toward Hannah, who was standing on the porch. "Pretty wife you got there. Be a shame if something happened to her." Caleb moved fast, grabbed the man by the collar, yanked him halfway off his horse. "You threaten her again," Caleb said, his voice deadly quiet, "and I'll bury you out here where no one will ever find you." The man's smile vanished. "Easy, Rourke. Get out." Caleb shoved him back. The man scrambled onto his horse and rode off, glancing back once with a look that promised trouble. Hannah stood frozen on the porch, her heart pounding. Caleb turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "He won't come back," Caleb said. "And if he does, he'll regret it." Hannah believed him. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. She'd thought this would be simple. A transaction. A year of pretending, then freedom. But it wasn't simple. It was dangerous. And she wasn't sure she was strong enough to survive it. But as she lay there, listening to the wind outside, she realized something. She didn't want to run anymore. She wanted to fight. And maybe, just maybe, she finally had someone worth fighting alongside. The days that followed blurred together in a rhythm Hannah had never known before. Wake before dawn, start the fire, make coffee strong enough to wake the dead, cook breakfast for 4 men who ate like they were preparing for war, clean, mend, repeat. It wasn't the work that surprised her. She'd worked her whole life. What surprised her was the quiet respect that came with it. Tom always said thank you. Billy cleared his own plate without being asked. Marcus nodded at her every morning like she mattered, and Caleb watched her with something she couldn't quite name. Not attraction, not pity. Something else, something careful. She didn't trust it yet, but she didn't hate it either. 3 weeks in, Hannah was kneading dough when she heard horses approaching. She wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the window, her stomach tightening. 2 riders. Not Hale's men, she'd learned to recognize their arrogance from a distance. These were different, older, weathered. Caleb stepped out onto the porch before they reached the house, his rifle resting casually against his shoulder. Not aimed, not yet, but ready. "Help you, gentlemen?" he called out. The lead rider, a man with a silver beard and eyes like chips of ice, reined in his horse. "Looking for Caleb Rourke." "You found him." "Name's Jensen. This here's my partner Dale. We're surveyors, working for the territorial office." Caleb's expression didn't change. "Didn't ask for any surveyors." "Didn't say you did." Jensen pulled a folded paper from his coat. "We're mapping the valley. New rail lines coming through. Need to chart the best route." "Rail line." Caleb's voice went flat. "Whose idea was that?" Jensen's smile was thin. "Progress doesn't ask permission, Mr. Rourke. It just shows up." Hannah stepped onto the porch, staying close to the door. Caleb glanced at her, a quick flicker of acknowledgement, then turned back to the surveyors. "You tell whoever sent you that they're not running any rail through my land without my say-so." "Your land borders the route," Dale said, speaking for the first time. His voice was nasal, irritating. "We're not asking to cut through it, just need to survey the edges." "Then survey from a distance." Jensen's jaw tightened. "Mr. Rourke, you're within your rights to refuse access. But I should mention, Victor Hale's already given us permission to cross his holdings. Said he's eager to see the valley developed. Said you might be resistant." There it was. Hale's fingerprints all over this. "Hale can do what he wants with his land," Caleb said. "Mine's not for sale and it's not for surveying. Now get moving before I lose my patience." Jensen and Dale exchanged a look. Then Jensen tipped his hat, his smile gone. "We'll be back, Mr. Rourke, with the proper authorities if need be." Looking forward to it. The surveyors turned their horses and rode off, slow and deliberate, making sure Caleb knew they weren't afraid. Hannah waited until they were out of sight before speaking. What was that really about? Control. Caleb lowered the rifle. Hale's trying to box me in. If the rail comes through, property values shift. He'll claim eminent domain, say the territory needs my land for the greater good. I'll get pennies on the dollar, and he'll swoop in and buy up everything around me. Can he do that? If he's got the right people in his pocket? Yeah, he can. Hannah felt anger coiling in her chest. So what do we do? Caleb looked at her, surprised by the we. Then something shifted in his expression, something almost like approval. We fight, but smart, not head on. How? I don't know yet. He rubbed the back of his neck, tension radiating from him. But I'll figure it out. Hannah wanted to say something reassuring, something useful, but the words stuck in her throat. She wasn't good at this, wasn't good at people. So she just nodded and went back inside to finish the bread. But her hands were shaking as she worked the dough. She'd thought marriage to Caleb would give her a year of safety, a year to disappear. Instead, she'd walked straight into the middle of a war, and she had no idea if either of them would survive it. That night, Caleb didn't come in for supper. Hannah set his plate aside and waited, her stomach twisting with an anxiety she didn't want to examine too closely. When an hour passed, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped outside. She found him in the barn, working on a broken wagon wheel by lantern light. His shirt was damp with sweat despite the evening chill, and he looked exhausted. You need to eat, Hannah said. He didn't look up. I'll eat when I'm done. You'll pass out if you don't eat. I'm fine. Hannah crossed her arms. You're not fine. You've been out here for hours. Caleb finally looked up, irritation flashing in his eyes. What do you want me to say, Hannah? That I'm scared? That I don't know how to stop Hale from taking everything I've got left? That would make you feel better? His words hit harder than he probably meant them to. Hannah flinched but didn't back down. I want you to stop acting like you're alone in this, she said quietly. Caleb stared at her. Then he set down the tool he was holding and exhaled slowly. I've been alone in this for 2 years since my brother died. I'm not used to... He gestured vaguely between them. This. Neither am I, Hannah admitted. But we made a deal, and part of that deal is not letting you work yourself to death because you're too stubborn to ask for help. Caleb's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You always this bossy? Only when people deserve it. He shook his head, but the tension in his shoulders eased. All right. I'll eat. They walked back to the house together, the lantern swinging between them. Hannah reheated his supper while he washed his hands at the basin. When she set the plate in front of him, he ate without argument, and she felt a small, unexpected surge of satisfaction. Thank you, Caleb said when he finished. Hannah nodded. Then, because she couldn't help herself, she asked, Your brother, what happened to him? Caleb's face went still. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, Accident. That's what they called it. But you don't believe that? No. His voice was rough. He was careful, smart. He wouldn't have been thrown from a horse unless something spooked it. And there were tracks, boot prints, near where it happened. But by the time I got there, the rain had washed most of them away. You think Hale was involved? I can't prove it, but yeah, I think so. Hannah's hands clenched in her lap. I'm sorry. Caleb met her eyes. Me too. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling in the stove. Then Caleb stood, pushed his chair back, and paused. I meant what I said that first night, he said, about not letting anyone treat you like a joke. I know this wasn't what you signed up for. Surveyors, threats, all of it. If you want out, I'll understand. Hannah looked at him, this hard, tired man who'd chosen her for no reason she could understand, and felt something shift inside her. I'm not leaving, she said. Caleb searched her face. Then he nodded. All right then. He headed toward his cot in the corner of the main room, and Hannah retreated to her bedroom, closing the door softly behind her. She lay in the dark, listening to the wind outside, and realized she'd meant it. She wasn't leaving, not yet. Maybe not ever. The trouble came 3 days later. Hannah was hanging laundry when she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Her pulse spiked. She dropped the sheet she was holding and ran toward the barn, where Caleb and Marcus were shoeing a horse. "Riders," she said, breathless. Caleb's head snapped up. "How many?" "I don't know." "A lot." He and Marcus exchanged a look. Then Caleb grabbed his rifle and strode toward the house. "Marcus, get Tom and Billy. Tell them to arm up but stay out of sight unless I signal." Marcus nodded and took off toward the bunkhouse. Hannah followed Caleb, her heart hammering. "What do I do?" she asked. "Stay inside. Lock the door. Don't come out unless I call for you." "Caleb! Hannah!" He stopped, looked at her. "Please." She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her, so she nodded and stepped inside, though she left the door cracked just enough to see. The riders came into view a few minutes later. 8 of them, all armed, all wearing the hard, cruel expressions of men who got paid to hurt people. Victor Hale rode at the front. He was dressed like a gentleman, suit, vest, polished boots, but there was nothing gentle about him. He looked at Caleb the way a wolf looks at a wounded deer. "Mr. Rourke," Hale said, dismounting, "I thought it was time we had a conversation." "We've got nothing to talk about," Caleb said. "I disagree," Hale smiled. "You see, I've been patient, very patient. I made you a fair offer. You refused. I sent the surveyors. You refused them too. Now I'm wondering, what's it going to take for you to see reason?" "I see just fine," Caleb said. "And what I see is a man who wants something he's got no right to." Hale's smile didn't falter. "Rights are flexible, Mr. Rourke, especially out here. You've got a nice setup, good land, strong water source. It'd be a shame if something happened to it." "You threatening me again?" "I'm offering you a choice." Hale gestured to the ranch, the barn, the house. "Sell to me now, and you walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else. Refuse and, well, accidents happen. Buildings burn, cattle stampede. People get hurt." Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. "You think I'm afraid of you?" "I think you should be." One of Hale's men shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his gun. Caleb didn't move, but Hannah saw the way his jaw clenched, the way his finger hovered near the trigger. This was about to turn into a bloodbath. And then she did something incredibly stupid. She stepped outside. "Mr. Hale," she said, her voice loud and clear. Every head turned toward her. Caleb's face went pale. "Hannah, get back inside." "I just wanted to offer you gentlemen some coffee," Hannah continued, ignoring him. "Seems rude not to, seeing as you rode all this way." Hale's eyes narrowed. Then he laughed. "Well, well, the new Mrs. Rourke. I heard about your unconventional wedding. Quite the spectacle from what I'm told." Hannah forced herself to smile. "Glad we could entertain you." "Coffee sounds lovely," Hale said, still smiling, "but I'm afraid we're not here for pleasantries." "Then why are you here?" Hannah asked. "Because it seems to me like you're trespassing." One of Hale's men snorted. Hale's smile thinned. "You've got a bold wife, Rourke," he said. "I wonder how long that'll last." "Long as she wants," Caleb said flatly. Hale studied them both. Then he turned to his men. "Let's go. I think Mr. Rourke needs more time to think." He mounted his horse, but before he left, he looked down at Hannah. "Enjoy your coffee, Mrs. Rourke, and enjoy this ranch while you can. Because one way or another it won't be yours much longer." Then he rode off, his men trailing behind him. Hannah stood frozen until they were out of sight. Then her knees buckled. She grabbed the porch railing to steady herself. Caleb was beside her in an instant. "What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking you were about to get shot," Hannah snapped back, her voice shaking. "So you decided to get shot instead?" "I decided to buy us time." "By walking into the middle of it?" Caleb's voice was rising now, anger and fear mixing together. "You could have—" "But I didn't." Hannah straightened, her own anger flaring. "And neither did you. So maybe stop yelling at me and start figuring out what we're going to do next." Caleb stared at her, breathing hard. Then he shook his head, something like disbelief crossing his face. "You're insane." "Probably." Hannah's legs were still shaking, but she didn't let it show. "But I'm also still alive, so are you." Tom, Billy, and Marcus emerged from the bunkhouse, rifles in hand, looking confused. "What happened?" Tom asked. "Hale happened," Caleb said, "and he's done playing nice." "What do we do?" Billy asked, his young face pale. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "We prepare. Check the fences. Double the watch at night, and we don't let our guard down, not for a second." The men nodded and dispersed. Caleb turned back to Hannah. "Don't ever do that again," he said quietly. "Do what?" "Risk yourself for me." Hannah met his eyes. "Then don't risk yourself for me either." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. He just turned and walked away. Hannah stood on the porch, her heart still racing, and realized something. She'd stopped being invisible, and she had no idea if that was a good thing or a death sentence. The next week passed in tense silence. Caleb barely spoke. The ranch hands moved like men expecting an ambush, and Hannah threw herself into work, cooking, cleaning, mending, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. But she couldn't stop thinking about Hale's smile, the way he'd looked at her, like she was already dead. One afternoon, while Caleb was out riding the fence line, a woman rode up to the ranch. Hannah didn't recognize her at first. She was dressed in traveling clothes, her hair pinned neatly under a hat, and she sat her horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent her whole life in the saddle. "Can I help you?" Hannah asked, stepping onto the porch. The woman dismounted. "You're Hannah, aren't you, Caleb's wife?" "I am." The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Margaret Brennan. I own the ranch 2 valleys over." Hannah had heard the name. Margaret Brennan was one of the few women who'd managed to hold on to land after her husband died. People respected her. Some feared her. "What can I do for you?" Hannah asked warily. "I heard about your run-in with Victor Hale," Margaret said. "Word travels fast out here." "I suppose it does." Margaret stepped closer, her expression serious. "I came to warn you. Hale's not going to stop. He's been buying up land for months, pushing people out. Anyone who refuses to sell? Well, let's just say bad things tend to happen to them." "We know," Hannah said quietly. "Do you know he's got the sheriff in his pocket? The judge too?" Hannah's stomach dropped. "No, I didn't." "Well, now you do." Margaret's voice softened. "I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying it because you need to be smart. Hale doesn't fight fair. And if you're going to survive him, you can't either." Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting you find allies. People who have just as much reason to hate Hale as you do." Margaret paused. "I'm offering to be one of them." "Why would you help us?" "Because Hale tried to buy my land too. And when I refused, he sent men to burn my barn. They didn't succeed, but they tried." Margaret's eyes hardened. "I don't forget things like that." Hannah studied her. There was steel in this woman, and honesty. "I'll talk to Caleb," Hannah said. "Good." Margaret handed her a folded piece of paper. "That's where to find me if you need me. Don't wait too long. Hale moves fast." She mounted her horse and rode off, leaving Hannah standing there with the paper clutched in her hand. When Caleb returned that evening, Hannah told him everything. He listened in silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he took the paper from her and stared at it. "You trust her?" he asked. "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "But I think she's telling the truth." Caleb nodded slowly. "I'll ride out there tomorrow, see what she knows." "I'm coming with you." He looked at her, surprised. "Hannah." "I'm coming," she said firmly. "If we're going to fight Hale, I need to know what we're up against, and I'm not going to sit here waiting while you handle everything." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but then he sighed. "All right, but you stay close, and if anything goes wrong, you listen to me. Understood?" "Understood." They rode out at dawn the next day, the air cold and sharp. Margaret's ranch was smaller than Caleb's, but well kept. She greeted them at the door, her expression cautious but welcoming. "Come in," she said. "We've got a lot to talk about." Inside, she poured coffee and sat across from them at a worn wooden table. "Hale's planning something big," she said without preamble. "I've got a friend who works in the territorial office. He says Hale's been pushing for the rail line to come through here specifically. Says it'll bring jobs, development, progress. But what it'll really do is give him control over the entire valley." "How?" Caleb asked. "Eminent domain. He'll claim the territory needs the land for the public good. The ranchers who won't sell will be forced out. and Hale will buy up everything at a fraction of its worth. Caleb's jaw clenched. There's got to be a way to stop him. There is, Margaret said, but it's risky. We'd need proof that he's manipulating the process, bribing officials, falsifying surveys, anything we can take to the territorial governor. And how do we get that proof? Hannah asked. Margaret's smile was grim. We steal it. Caleb leaned back in his chair. You're talking about breaking into his office. I'm talking about doing whatever it takes to survive. Hannah felt her pulse quicken. This was dangerous, reckless, the kind of thing that could get them all killed, but it was also the first real chance they'd had to fight back. I'm in, Hannah said. Both Caleb and Margaret turned to stare at her. Hannah, Caleb started. I'm in, she repeated. If we're going to do this, we do it together. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Margaret. When? 2 weeks. Hale's hosting a gathering at his estate. Big party. Everyone who's anyone will be there. That's when his office will be empty. Caleb nodded. Then we've got 2 weeks to prepare. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning. By the time they rode back to the ranch, the sun was setting and Hannah's mind was spinning. She'd come to this ranch expecting to hide, to disappear, to survive quietly. But quiet wasn't an option anymore. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't want it to be. The 2 weeks crawled by like wounded animals. Every morning, Hannah woke expecting to see Hale's men on the horizon. Every night, she lay awake listening for hoofbeats that never came. The waiting was worse than the threat itself. Caleb threw himself into preparation with the kind of focus that bordered on obsession. He rode the property twice a day, checking fences, counting cattle, looking for signs of tampering. Tom and Marcus took shifts at night, armed and watchful. Billy, young and eager, wanted to help but mostly just looked terrified. Hannah kept the house running, but her hands shook when she poured coffee. Her mind wandered during simple tasks. She'd catch herself staring out the window, scanning the valley, her breath tight in her chest. You're going to wear a hole in that floor, Caleb said one evening. Hannah stopped pacing and realized she'd been doing it without thinking. Sorry. Don't be sorry. Just sit down before you collapse. She sat, but her leg bounced under the table. Caleb watched her with an expression she couldn't read. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. The party. Breaking into Hale's office. It's dangerous, and it's not your fight. Yes, it is. Hannah, you chose me, she interrupted. In front of the whole town. You could have picked anyone, but you picked me. That makes this my fight, whether I want it to be or not. Caleb leaned back, studying her. That's not why you're doing this. Hannah's jaw tightened. Then why am I doing it? Because you're tired of being afraid. The words hit her like a slap. Not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She looked away, feeling exposed. Maybe. There's no shame in that, Caleb said. Fear's kept you alive this long, but it won't get you through what's coming. Then what will? He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, anger. Hannah looked at him, surprised. I've been angry for 2 years, Caleb continued. Angry at Hale. Angry at the world. Angry at myself for not seeing what was happening until it was too late. He paused. Anger's a tool. Use it right, and it'll keep you sharp. Use it wrong, and it'll get you killed. Which one are you doing? Hannah asked. Caleb's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Still figuring that out. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling in the stove. Then Hannah said, I'm scared. Good. Scared means you're paying attention. What if we fail? Then we fail, Caleb said, but at least we'll have tried. Hannah wanted to believe that was enough, but the knot in her stomach said otherwise. 3 days before the party, Margaret rode over with a plan sketched on a piece of paper. She spread it across the kitchen table while Caleb and Hannah leaned in. Hale's estate is here, Margaret said, pointing to a rough drawing of a large house surrounded by smaller structures. His office is on the second floor, east wing. There'll be guards outside, but during the party, most of them will be distracted. Most isn't all, Caleb said. No, but it's better odds than we'll get any other time. Margaret traced a line on the map. There's a servant's entrance here. During the party, staff will be moving in and out constantly. If Hannah goes in as help, she can slip upstairs while everyone's focused on the main hall. Hannah's pulse quickened. Just me? You're less likely to draw attention, Margaret said. Caleb's got a reputation. People know his face. But you, no offense, you're still mostly invisible to them. It stung, but Hannah knew it was true. She'd spent her whole life being overlooked. For once, that might actually work in her favor. What am I looking for? Hannah asked. Documents, ledgers. Anything that shows Hale's been paying off officials or falsifying land claims. Margaret pulled out a small leather satchel. Put whatever you find in here. Don't read it. Don't linger. Get in, get out. And if someone stops me? Margaret's expression was grim. Then you run. Caleb shook his head. I don't like this. Too many things can go wrong. They can go wrong no matter what we do, Margaret said. But this is our best shot. She's right, Hannah said quietly. Caleb turned to her, his face hard. You understand what you're agreeing to. If they catch you, I can't protect you. Hale will... He stopped, his jaw working. I know, Hannah said, but we're out of options. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he just exhaled slowly and nodded. All right, then we do it smart. Margaret, you'll be at the party as a guest. Keep an eye on Hale. Make sure he stays downstairs. I'll be outside with the horses, ready to move if things go bad. And if they go really bad, Hannah asked, then we ride fast and don't look back. The night of the party arrived too quickly. Hannah stood in front of the cracked mirror in her bedroom, barely recognizing herself. Margaret had brought her a plain servant's dress, dark, shapeless, forgettable. Her hair was pinned tight under a cap. No jewelry, no color, nothing that would make anyone look twice. She looked exactly like what she'd spent years being, invisible. But this time, she'd chosen it. Caleb was waiting outside, holding the reins of 2 horses. He looked tense, his eyes scanning the horizon even though it was barely dusk. You ready? He asked. No, Hannah said honestly. But I'm going anyway. Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or fear. If anything feels wrong, you get out. Don't be a hero. I'm not a hero, Hannah said. I'm just tired of running. Caleb reached out, hesitated, then squeezed her shoulder once. Brief, awkward, but real. Be careful, he said. You too. They rode in silence toward Hale's estate, the sun sinking behind the mountains. Margaret met them a mile out, dressed in a fine gown that made her look like someone who belonged at a party like this. She looked Hannah over and nodded approvingly. You'll do. Remember, servants' entrance east side. Wait for the 3rd course to be served. That's when the guards change shifts. You'll have about 10 minutes. 10 minutes to change everything, or destroy it. Hannah dismounted, her legs unsteady. Caleb stayed on his horse, his face shadowed. Hannah, he said. She looked up at him. Come back, he said simply. She nodded. Then she turned and walked toward the house before she could lose her nerve. Hale's estate was massive, far larger than Hannah had imagined. Lanterns lit the grounds, and music drifted from the open windows. Carriages lined the drive, depositing men in suits and women in silk. Hannah slipped past them, keeping her head down, and found the servants' entrance exactly where Margaret said it would be. A harried-looking woman with flour on her apron barely glanced at her. You're late. Grab a tray and start serving. Hannah nodded mutely and took a tray of glasses filled with champagne. Her hands trembled, but she forced them steady. She moved through the kitchen, into the hallway, toward the sound of laughter and music. The main hall was overwhelming. Chandeliers blazed overhead. Men in expensive suits clustered in groups, talking business and politics. Women in gowns that cost more than Hannah had ever owned glided between them. And at the center of it all, holding court like a king, was Victor Hale. He looked relaxed, confident, untouchable. Hannah hated him. She circulated with the tray, keeping her head down, her eyes on the floor. No one looked at her. No one ever did. She was part of the furniture, exactly what she needed to be. She counted the courses. First, a cold soup. Second, some kind of fish. Then, as the 3rd course was being plated in the kitchen, she slipped away. The hallway was empty. Hannah moved quickly, her heart pounding so loud she was sure someone would hear it. She found the staircase and climbed, every step feeling like it took an hour. At the top, she paused, listening. Voices below. Music. Laughter. But nothing up here. She moved down the hallway, checking doors, library, guest room, parlor. And then, there. A heavy wooden door with a brass nameplate. V. Hail. Hannah's hand shook as she reached for the handle. It turned. Unlocked. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her, her breath coming in short gasps. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Dark wood, leather chairs, a massive desk covered in papers. Bookshelves lined the walls, and a safe sat in the corner. She didn't have time for the safe. She went straight for the desk. The first drawer held nothing useful. Office supplies, letters about cattle prices. But the second drawer, that was different. Ledgers. Dozens of them. Hannah pulled one out, flipped it open, and saw columns of numbers. Names, dates, payments. Her pulse spiked. This was it. She stuffed the ledger into the satchel, then grabbed another. And another. She was reaching for a fourth when she heard footsteps in the hallway. Hannah froze. The footsteps stopped outside the door. She looked around frantically. No other exit. No windows large enough to climb through. Just the desk, the chairs, and the footsteps moved on. Hannah exhaled shakily and forced herself to keep moving. She grabbed one more ledger, shoved it into the satchel, and turned to leave. The door opened. A man stood in the doorway. Not Hale. One of his men. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face like a fist. "What the hell are you doing in here?" he demanded. Hannah's mind went blank. Then instinct kicked in. "I was told to bring Mr. Hale his cigars," she said, her voice meek. She gestured to the desk. "But I can't find them." The man's eyes narrowed. "Cigars?" "Yes, sir, the housekeeper sent me." He stepped closer, and Hannah's grip tightened on the satchel behind her back. "Mr. Hale doesn't keep cigars in his office," the man said slowly. Hannah swallowed. "Then I must have misunderstood. I'll go ask again. What's in the bag?" "Nothing, sir, just—" He lunged for it. Hannah jerked back, but he was faster. He grabbed the strap and yanked, ripping it from her hands. The satchel fell open and the ledgers spilled across the floor. The man's face went dark. "You little thief!" Hannah didn't think. She just ran. She shoved past him, stumbled into the hallway, and bolted toward the stairs. Behind her, the man shouted. Footsteps pounded after her. She hit the staircase at a dead run, nearly falling, and burst into the main hall. Heads turned, music stuttered, and Victor Hale's eyes locked onto hers. Recognition flashed across his face, then fury. "Stop her!" he roared. Hannah ran. She didn't know where she was going, just away, away from Hale, away from the guards, away from the trap she'd walked into. She tore through the crowd, shoved past a waiter, and crashed through a side door into the gardens. Cold air hit her face. She kept running, her lungs burning, her legs screaming. Behind her, men shouted. Footsteps thundered. She rounded a corner and slammed into someone. Caleb. He grabbed her shoulders, his face pale. "What happened?" "They found me," Hannah gasped. "The ledgers, I dropped them." "Forget the ledgers. We're leaving. Now." He pulled her toward the horses, but before they could reach them, men poured out of the house. 6 of them, armed. Caleb shoved Hannah behind him and drew his gun. "Don't do this, Rourke," one of the men said. "Hand over the girl, and maybe Hale goes easy on you." "Not a chance," Caleb said. "Then you're both dead." Hannah's heart hammered. There were too many of them, too many guns. This was it. This was how it ended. And then a shot rang out. But it didn't come from Hale's men. It came from the tree line. Margaret stepped into view, rifle raised. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The men hesitated. Margaret fired again, this time into the ground near their feet. They scattered. "Go!" Margaret shouted. "I'll hold them off!" Caleb didn't argue. He grabbed Hannah, hauled her onto his horse, and kicked it into a gallop. Hannah clung to him, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, as they tore across the valley. Behind them, more shots echoed. But they didn't stop. They didn't look back. They just rode. They didn't stop until they were miles away, deep in the hills where the trees grew thick and the ground turned rocky. Caleb finally reined in the horse, and Hannah slid off, her legs shaking so badly she almost collapsed. "Are you hurt?" Caleb asked, dismounting beside her. "No, I don't think so." Hannah's voice was hoarse. "Margaret, she knows how to handle herself," Caleb said, though his face was tight. "She'll get out." Hannah sank to the ground, her head in her hands. "I failed. I had the ledgers, and I dropped them. All of this was for nothing." "You're alive," Caleb said. "That's not nothing. But Hale still has everything. And now he knows we were trying to steal from him. He's going to come after us harder than ever." Caleb crouched beside her. "Then we'll be ready." Hannah looked up at him, her eyes burning. "How? We've got nothing. No proof, no allies, no—" "We've got each other," Caleb interrupted. "That's more than we had 2 months ago." Hannah wanted to believe him, but the fear clawing at her chest wouldn't let go. They stayed in the hills that night, sheltering under a rocky overhang while the temperature dropped. Caleb built a small fire, just enough to keep them from freezing, and they sat in silence, listening to the wind. "I should have listened to you," Hannah said finally. "You said it was too dangerous." "You made your choice," Caleb said. "I'm not going to punish you for it." "But, Hannah." He looked at her, his face serious in the firelight. "You did something tonight that most people wouldn't have the guts to do. You walked into Hale's house, alone, and you almost pulled it off. That takes courage. Or stupidity. Maybe both." A faint smile crossed his face. "But I'll take stupid and brave over smart and cowardly any day." Hannah felt something warm unfurl in her chest, not quite hope, but close. "What do we do now?" she asked. Caleb stared into the fire. "We go home. We regroup. And we figure out another way." "Oh, you really think there is one?" "I have to," Caleb said quietly. "Because if there's not, then my brother died for nothing, and I'm not ready to accept that." Hannah reached out, hesitated, then placed her hand on his. He didn't pull away. They sat like that for a long time, two people who'd been broken by the world, holding on to each other in the dark. And for the first time in a long time, Hannah didn't feel alone. When they returned to the ranch the next morning, Tom was waiting for them, his face grim. "What happened?" Caleb asked, dismounting. "Hale's men came by last night," Tom said. "Burned the east pasture, killed 3 head of cattle." Caleb's face went stone cold. "Anyone hurt?" "No, we drove them off before they could do more damage, but they'll be back." Hannah felt sick. This was her fault. She'd failed, and now Hale was retaliating. "Where's Marcus and Billy?" Caleb asked. "Fixing the fence. Trying to salvage what they can." Caleb nodded. "Tell them to stay armed. No one goes anywhere alone." Tom left, and Caleb turned to Hannah. "Get inside. Stay there." "Caleb, please, Hannah, just do it." She wanted to argue, but the look on his face stopped her. So she went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it, her hand shaking. This was war now, real war, and she had no idea if any of them would survive it. But as she stood there, something hardened inside her. She was done being afraid. She was done running. If Hale wanted a fight, she'd give him one, and she wouldn't stop until one of them was buried. The days after the fire blurred together in a haze of smoke and ash. Hannah couldn't get the smell out of her clothes, her hair, her lungs. Every breath tasted like destruction. The burned pasture stretched like a scar across the land, black and dead, a reminder of how close they were to losing everything. Caleb barely slept. He rode the property at all hours, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning for movement. Tom and Marcus took shifts through the night, their faces drawn and tired. Billy tried to keep up, but fear had settled into him like a sickness. He jumped at shadows, flinched at sudden noises, and Hannah saw the toll it was taking on the young man's spirit. Hannah cooked. It was all she knew how to do when the world felt like it was crumbling. She made stew that no one had appetite for, bread that went half-eaten, coffee that grew cold in forgotten cups. But she kept cooking anyway because stopping felt like giving up. And giving up meant Hale won. On the 3rd day after the fire, Margaret showed up. She rode in at dawn, slumped in her saddle, her face a mess of bruises and cuts. Hannah saw her first and ran out to meet her, her heart lurching at the sight. "Margaret!" Hannah reached up, helping the older woman dismount. Margaret's legs buckled, and Hannah caught her, feeling how much weight she'd lost, how she trembled. I'm all right, Margaret said, but her voice was weak. You're not all right. Come inside. Caleb emerged from the barn, his face darkening when he saw Margaret's condition. He took her other arm, and together they helped her into the house. Hannah settled her into a chair and immediately started heating water, gathering clean cloths. What happened? Caleb asked, his voice tight. Margaret touched her split lip gingerly, wincing. Hail happened. His men came to my ranch the night after the party. Must have been a dozen of them. They said I had something that belonged to him. Said I'd helped you steal from him. Hannah's hands froze. We brought this on you. No. Margaret's voice was sharp despite her injuries. Hale brought this on me. Hale and his greed and his belief that he can do whatever he wants to whoever he wants. She paused, catching her breath. I told them to go to hell. And they did this, Caleb said quietly. They burned my barn first. I watched it go up, watched my horses panic. I managed to get 2 out before her voice broke. The others didn't make it. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. She'd seen those horses, beautiful animals that Margaret had raised from foals. Then they came for the house, Margaret continued. Beat me. Tore the place apart looking for the ledgers they thought I had. When they didn't find anything, their leader, big man with a scar across his jaw, he carved a message into my door with his knife. What did it say? Caleb asked. Mind your business. Margaret's laugh was bitter, as if helping neighbors is some kind of crime. Hannah knelt beside her, carefully cleaning the cuts on her face. Some were deep, would leave scars. Others were already starting to heal, purple and yellow bruises blooming across her skin. I'm so sorry, Hannah whispered. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Margaret caught her hand, held it tight. That's what I came here to tell you. We're not going to win this fight with fear. We need anger. We need to hit back harder than they hit us. Caleb shook his head. We tried that. Look where it got us. Got you. So what do you suggest? We just roll over and let Hale take everything? I'm suggesting we're outgunned and outmanned. We need a different strategy. Like what? Margaret's voice was sharp with frustration. We tried to get proof. We failed. We tried to fight back. That failed too. What's left? The room fell silent. Hannah finished cleaning Margaret's wounds and sat back, her mind churning. There had to be something they were missing, some angle they hadn't considered. The federal marshals, Hannah said quietly. Both Caleb and Margaret turned to look at her. What about them? Caleb asked. Hale has the local law in his pocket. Dixon, Alcott, probably others, but he can't own everyone. The federal government, they're outside his reach, aren't they? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Maybe, but we'd need something substantial to bring them in. They don't come running just because some ranchers are having trouble. What about murder? Hannah said. Caleb's brother. You said you thought Hale was involved. Caleb's face went hard. I can't prove it. But there were tracks, evidence. What if we found someone who saw something, someone who's willing to talk now that Hale's grip is slipping? Who would talk? Margaret asked. Everyone's too scared. Hannah thought about it, turning the problem over in her mind. Then something clicked. Judge Alcott. What about him? Caleb asked. I saw his name in those ledgers. Multiple entries, large sums of money. He's been taking bribes for years. Hannah leaned forward. But more than that, he's weak. Scared. A man like that, if you push him the right way, he'll break. Caleb studied her. You want to blackmail a judge. I want to give him a choice. Help us, or go down with Hale when this all falls apart. Margaret's bruised face split into a grin. I like the way she thinks. It's dangerous, Caleb said. If Alcott runs to Hale, then we're no worse off than we are now, Hannah interrupted. But if he talks, if he gives us something we can take to the federal authorities, then we have a chance. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he looked at Margaret. What do you think? I think Hannah's got more guts than both of us combined, Margaret said. And I think she's right. Alcott's the weak link. We pull that thread, the whole thing might unravel. Caleb turned back to Hannah. You'd have to be the one to do it. He knows me, knows Margaret, but you're still mostly invisible to these people. Hannah felt a flutter of fear in her stomach, but she pushed it down. I can do it. You sure? She met his eyes. I'm sure. That night, Hannah lay awake, her mind racing through the plan. It was risky, More than risky, it was potentially suicidal. But what choice did they have? Sit around and wait for Hale to burn them out one by one? She heard Caleb moving in the main room, restless as always. After a moment's hesitation, she got up and went out to him. He was sitting by the dying fire, staring into the embers. He looked up when she approached, surprise flickering across his face. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much to think about." Caleb gestured to the chair beside him. Hannah sat, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. "You don't have to do this," Caleb said quietly. "Tomorrow, Alcott. Any of it. We've been over this." "I know. But I need you to understand, if something goes wrong, if Alcott or Hale or anyone else hurts you—" He stopped, his voice rough. "I wouldn't forgive myself." Hannah looked at him, really looked at him. In the firelight, she could see the exhaustion etched into his face, the worry lines around his eyes. This man who'd chosen her on a whim, who'd tied his fate to hers for reasons she still didn't fully understand. "Why did you really pick me?" she asked. "That day in town. You could have chosen anyone." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, "Because you looked like I felt." "What do you mean?" "Trapped, cornered, like the whole world was pressing down on you and you couldn't get out from under it." He paused. "I saw that look in the mirror every day after my brother died. And when I saw it in you, I thought, maybe we could help each other survive." Hannah's throat tightened. "And have we? Helped each other?" Caleb's eyes met hers. "Yeah, we have." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. Then Hannah reached out and took his hand. He squeezed back, and they stayed like that until the fire burned down to nothing. The next morning, Hannah rode into Red Hollow alone. The town looked the same as always. Dusty streets, weathered buildings, people going about their business. But Hannah felt different riding through it. She wasn't the invisible cook anymore. She was Caleb Rourke's wife, the woman who'd broken into Victor Hale's office. People stared, some with curiosity, some with suspicion. Hannah kept her head up, her eyes forward, and rode straight to Judge Alcott's house. The house was on the edge of town, a sagging structure that had seen better days. Paint peeled from the siding. The porch steps were rotting. Hannah tied her horse and knocked on the door. It took a while for Alcott to answer. When he did, he was in his shirt sleeves, his face flushed with drink even though it wasn't yet noon. He blinked at her in confusion. "Mrs. Rourke?" His voice was slurred. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, Judge Alcott. It's important." He hesitated, swaying slightly. Then he stepped aside. "Come in, I suppose." The inside of the house was worse than the outside. Papers and empty bottles littered every surface. The air was stale and thick with the smell of unwashed clothes and spilled liquor. Hannah had to breathe through her mouth to keep from gagging. "Forgive the mess," Alcott muttered, clearing a chair. "I wasn't expecting company." Hannah sat, folding her hands in her lap. She needed to look small, harmless. Exactly what he expected from her. "What can I do for you?" Alcott asked, pouring himself a drink with shaking hands. "I need to know about Victor Hale," Hannah said, simply. Alcott's hand froze halfway to his mouth. "What about him?" "I know he's paying you. I saw the ledgers." The color drained from Alcott's face. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. He didn't seem to notice. I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." Hannah kept her voice calm, steady. "You've been taking money from Hale for years. To rule in his favor, to push through land claims that should have been denied, to look the other way when his men break the law. You can't prove that." But his voice was weak, desperate. "I don't need to prove it to you." Hannah pulled out the blank piece of paper she'd tucked into her coat. "I copied information from those ledgers before I had to leave them behind. Names, dates, amounts. Yours was at the top of the list." Well, it was a complete lie. But Alcott was too drunk and too scared to question it. He stared at the paper, his face going from pale to gray. "What do you want?" "I want you to write a statement. Everything Hale's done. Everyone he's paid off. Every law he's broken. Every crime you know about." "He'll kill me." Alcott's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe. But if you don't help us, you'll hang alongside him when the federal marshals finally come. And they will come, Judge Alcott, with or without your help. The only question is whether you're going to be a witness or a defendant." Alcott sank into a chair, looking suddenly 20 years older. His hands trembled as he reached for the bottle again, but it was empty. He stared at it like he'd lost his best friend. He said it was temporary, Alcott said, more to himself than to Hannah. Just a few favors, just some paperwork, said I'd be taken care of. And were you? Hannah asked. Alcott's laugh was hollow. Look around. Does this look like being taken care of? Hannah waited. She could see him breaking, crumbling under the weight of years of bad decisions. If I do this, Alcott said finally, if I write what you want, you'll keep my name out of it? Tell the marshals I cooperated? I'll do what I can, Hannah said. It wasn't a promise, but it was enough. Alcott stared at her for a long moment. Then he stood, wobbling slightly, and moved to his desk. He found paper and pen, sat down heavily, and began to write. Hannah watched him, her heart pounding. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. It took him an hour to write everything down. When he finished, his hand was cramping, and the pages were covered in his spidery handwriting. He signed it at the bottom, then pushed it across the desk to Hannah. She picked it up, scanned it quickly. Names she recognized: Dixon, Hale's foreman, several businessmen in town, crimes detailed with dates and amounts. And at the end, a paragraph about Caleb's brother. Hannah's breath caught. Alcott had written that Hale had ordered the killing, that 2 of his men had carried it out, that Alcott had ruled it an accident to avoid investigation. This was it. This was everything they needed. Thank you, Hannah said, folding the papers carefully and tucking them inside her coat. Alcott didn't respond. He was staring at his empty hands, looking lost. Hannah stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Judge Alcott, you did the right thing. Did I? His voice was hollow. Or did I just sign my own death warrant? Hannah didn't have an answer for that. She just left, stepping out into the bright afternoon sun, and untied her horse. She'd made it halfway down the street when someone grabbed her arm. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Sheriff Dixon. His smile was cold, predatory. Well, well, he said. Out for a stroll, Mrs. Rourke? Hannah tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Let go of me. Not until you tell me what you were doing at the judge's house. That's none of your business. Dixon's smile widened. Everything in this town is my business, especially when it involves people poking their noses where they don't belong. Hannah's mind raced. If Dixon searched her, if he found the confession, everything was over. She needed to get away. Now. I was asking for legal advice, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. About my marriage, property rights. Things I have a legal right to know. Dixon studied her, his eyes narrowing. You expect me to believe that? I don't care what you believe. Now let go, or I'll scream. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't. His fingers dug into her arm hard enough to bruise. Then he released her suddenly, laughing. Run along, little mouse, he said, but watch your step. This town's not safe for people who cause trouble. Hannah didn't run. Every instinct screamed at her to bolt, to get on her horse and ride as fast as she could. But running would confirm his suspicions. So she walked, slowly, deliberately. Each step measured, even though her heart was screaming. She didn't look back until she reached the edge of town. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. She rode hard back to the ranch, the confession pressed against her chest like a talisman. When she arrived, Caleb was waiting on the porch, his face tight with worry. Did you get it? He asked before she'd even dismounted. Hannah pulled out the papers, her hands still shaking. I got it. Caleb took them, unfolded them, and his eyes widened as he read. Hannah, this is everything. Bribes, land fraud. And here, his voice caught. He admits they killed my brother. Hannah saw the pain flash across his face, quickly buried. What do we do now? Now we get this to the federal marshals. Tonight. It's a 2-day ride to the territorial office. Then we leave now, before Hale gets wind of what we've done. Margaret appeared from the barn, her bruises still vivid, but her eyes sharp. I'm coming too. Margaret, Caleb started. Don't argue. You'll need someone watching your backs. And I'm not sitting here while you two ride off into danger. Caleb looked like he wanted to protest, but he just nodded. All right. Tom, Marcus, Billy, you hold the ranch. Anyone comes, anyone at all, you hide. Don't be heroes. Tom stepped forward. Boss, maybe we should— No arguments. That's an order. They packed quickly. Supplies, weapons, the precious confession wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the elements. Hannah changed into riding clothes, strapped a knife to her belt that Margaret insisted she carry. You know how to use it? Margaret asked. I can learn fast if I need to. Margaret's smile was grim. That's the spirit. As the sun began to set, the three of them rode out, heading northeast toward the territorial capital. They pushed hard, covering ground fast, and by the time night fell, they were miles from the ranch. They made camp in a dry ravine, sheltered from the wind. Caleb built a small fire while Margaret kept watch, and Hannah tried to eat, but the food stuck in her throat. You did something incredible today, Caleb said quietly, settling beside her. Hannah looked up. I lied to a judge and blackmailed him. You saved us. There's a difference. Is there? Hannah stared into the fire. A few months ago, I would have never done something like that. I would have been too scared. What changed? Hannah thought about it. The wedding, the threats, the fire, all the moments that had forced her to be braver than she felt. You, she said finally. This place, everything. I got tired of being the person everyone expected me to be. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'm glad you're here. Hannah's chest tightened. Me too. Margaret came over, settling on the other side of the fire. We should sleep in shifts. I'll take first watch. Wake me in 3 hours, Caleb said. They settled in, but Hannah couldn't sleep. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow looked like a threat. She lay there, staring at the stars, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Sometime in the dead of night, she finally dozed off, but her dreams were full of fire and smoke and Victor Hale's cold smile. They woke before dawn and rode hard through the morning. By midday, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, dark and threatening. We need to find shelter, Margaret said, eyeing the sky. But there was nothing around them except open plains, no buildings, no trees large enough to provide cover. The storm hit like a freight train. One moment the air was still. The next the wind was roaring, rain coming down in sheets so thick Hannah could barely see. Her horse stumbled, and she grabbed the saddle horn to keep from falling. There, Caleb shouted over the wind, pointing. Through the rain, Hannah could barely make out a shape. Some kind of building. They rode toward it, fighting the storm every step. It was an old way station, half collapsed but still standing. They dragged their horses into what used to be a stable and stumbled into the main building. Water leaked through the roof in a dozen places, but it was better than being out in the storm. Caleb managed to find some dry wood, a miracle, and got a fire started. They huddled around it, soaked to the bone, shivering. How long will this last? Hannah asked. Could be hours, could be days. Margaret wrung water from her hair. Either way, we're stuck here until it passes. They sat in miserable silence, listening to the rain hammer against the walls. Hannah's teeth chattered despite the fire. Then Caleb stiffened. Do you hear that? Everyone froze. Over the sound of the rain, Hannah could hear it too, hoofbeats. How many? Margaret whispered. Caleb moved to the window, peering out. Can't tell, at least 4, maybe more. Hannah's heart sank. Hale's men. They followed us. Caleb's voice was grim. Or they got lucky. Either way, they were trapped. Caleb moved fast, dousing the fire and plunging them into darkness. He grabbed Hannah, pulled her behind a pile of rotting timber in the corner. Don't move, he breathed. Don't make a sound. Margaret positioned herself on the other side of the room, her rifle ready. Hannah pressed herself against the wall, trying to slow her breathing, trying not to panic. The door creaked open. Heavy footsteps entered. Hannah could see the man's silhouette against the gray light from outside. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of someone who knew how to kill. Looks empty, the man called out. Check anyway, another voice answered from outside. The man moved through the room, his boots squelching in the water that had leaked in. Hannah held her breath, Caleb's hand tight on her arm. The footsteps came closer, closer. Hannah could see him now, just feet away. If he turned, if he looked down. Found their horses, someone shouted from outside. The man in the room cursed. They're here somewhere. Spread out. Find them. He turned to leave, and Hannah thought they might make it. Then his boot caught on something, and he stumbled. His hand shot out to catch himself, landing on the timber pile. Wood shifted, creaked. The man froze. Then he yanked his gun free and spun toward them. Caleb was faster. He burst from cover, rifle raised, and fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The man dropped. Outside, the others shouted. Caleb grabbed Hannah's hand. "Run!" They burst out the back of the building into the storm. Bullets whipped past them, invisible in the rain. Hannah ran blind, her hand locked in Caleb's, her heart hammering. They made it to a cluster of rocks and dove behind them. Caleb fired back, keeping the men pinned, but Hannah could hear them spreading out, flanking them. "We can't hold them off," she shouted. "I know." Margaret was somewhere out there too, firing from a different position. But there were too many of Hale's men. They were being overwhelmed. And then, over the roar of the storm, Hannah heard something else. A whistle, sharp, piercing, official. The shooting stopped. Through the rain, figures appeared. Not Hale's men, different, wearing badges that gleamed even in the storm. Federal marshals. Hale's men saw them too. Some ran. Others dropped their weapons and raised their hands. One of the marshals, a tall man with a graying beard, approached the rocks where Hannah and Caleb were hiding. "Caleb Rourke, he called out. Caleb stood slowly, his rifle still ready. "That's me." The marshal looked between him and Hannah. "We got word you might be headed our way. Someone sent a tip. Said you had information about Victor Hale." Hannah's breath caught. "Who?" The marshal's mouth twitched. "Margaret Brennan. She rode through the night to reach us 2 days ago. Said it was a matter of life and death." Hannah looked around wildly and spotted Margaret emerging from behind another rock, soaked and grinning. "You knew," Hannah said. "You knew they were coming." "Insurance," Margaret said. "Figured even if everything went wrong, we'd have backup." The lead marshal stepped forward. "I'm Marshal Garrett. You have something for us?" Caleb reached into his coat with shaking hands and pulled out the oilcloth-wrapped confession. Water had soaked through his clothes, but the papers inside were dry. He handed them over. Marshal Garrett opened them, his eyes scanning the pages. His expression grew darker with every line. "This is substantial," he said finally. "If even half of this is true, Hale's finished." "It's all true," Caleb said, his voice rough. Garrett folded the papers carefully. "Then we ride for his estate, now." "In this storm?" one of the other marshals asked. "Especially in this storm. He won't be expecting us." They mounted up, a strange procession of marshals, ranchers, and justice moving through the dying storm. By the time they reached Hale's property, the rain had stopped and the sun was breaking through the clouds. Hale was on his porch when they arrived, arms crossed, looking smug. But when he saw the marshals, his expression faltered. "Victor Hale," Marshal Garrett said, dismounting. "You're under arrest for bribery, fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and a dozen other charges I'll be happy to enumerate." Hale's face went white, then red. "On whose authority?" "Federal authority." Garrett held up the confession. "And we've got signed testimony from Judge Alcott himself." Hale's eyes found Hannah and Caleb. The hatred in them was murderous. "You!" he spat. "You did this!" Hannah met his gaze, unflinching. She thought about this first time she'd seen him, how terrified she'd been, how small. She didn't feel small anymore. "Yes," she said clearly. "I did." Hale lunged toward her, but the marshals grabbed him, forcing his hands behind his back. He fought them, cursing, threatening, promising vengeance. It didn't matter. He was finished. As they loaded him into a wagon, still screaming threats, Hannah felt something shift inside her. The fear she'd carried for months, the constant dread, the waiting for the next disaster, all of it lifted. They'd won. Caleb came to stand beside her, his hand finding hers. They watched together as Hale was driven away, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Hannah allowed herself to hope. "It's really over," she said quietly. Caleb squeezed her hand. "Yeah, it is." Margaret joined them, looking exhausted but triumphant. "Drinks are on me when we get back to town." Hannah laughed, actually laughed, and felt tears streak down her cheeks. Happy tears, relief tears. They'd survived, all of them. And the future, for the first time, looked bright. The ride back to the ranch felt like a dream. Hannah kept expecting to wake up, to find out it had all been wishful thinking, that Hale was still out there, still hunting them. But every time she opened her eyes, Caleb was still beside her, solid and real. Margaret rode on her other side, humming tunelessly despite her bruises. And the valley spread out before them, green and alive and waiting. The sun was setting when they finally crested the ridge overlooking the ranch. Hannah had seen this view 100 times, but it looked different now. The barn stood solid against the darkening sky. Smoke rose from the chimney, Tom keeping the fires going. The corrals held cattle that were theirs, safe, no longer under threat. It looked like peace, like home. Tom was waiting on the porch when they rode up, rifle in hand, until he recognized them. Then his weathered face broke into something that might have been a smile, rare for Tom, who treated emotions like luxuries he couldn't afford. "You're back," he said simply. "We're back," Caleb confirmed, swinging down from his horse. He helped Hannah dismount, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "And it's done. Hale's arrested. Federal marshals took him this morning." Tom's eyes widened fractionally, which for Tom was equivalent to shocked disbelief. He set down his rifle and let out a breath so deep it seemed to come from his boots. "Well, I'll be damned." Marcus and Billy came running from the barn, and the questions started immediately. Where had they been? What happened? Was it true about Hale? Caleb told the story. The confession from Alcott, the storm, the ambush, the marshals arriving like cavalry in some dime novel. Billy's eyes went wide as dinner plates. "So we're really safe?" the young man asked, his voice cracking slightly. "He can't hurt us anymore?" "He can't hurt anyone anymore," Caleb said firmly. "He's going to prison for a long time." Billy whooped, spinning in a circle, his young face split by a grin. The sound was infectious. Marcus, usually so stoic, actually smiled. Tom clapped Caleb on the shoulder hard enough to make him stagger. "You did good, boss," Tom said gruffly. "Real good." Hannah climbed down from the horse, her legs wobbling from exhaustion. She was soaked from the storm, covered in mud, and probably looked like something the cat dragged in, but she'd never felt better in her life. Margaret dismounted too, moving carefully because of her injuries. "I need to check on my place tomorrow, see what's salvageable." "Stay here tonight," Hannah said immediately. "You shouldn't be alone." Margaret looked surprised, then something soft crossed her face. "Thanks, I will." They all trooped into the house, tracking mud and rainwater across the floor Hannah had scrubbed just days ago. She didn't care. She immediately started making coffee and warming up the stew she'd left simmering before they'd ridden out. The familiar motions were soothing: ladle, stir, pour. Normal things, safe things. The men sat around the table talking over each other, reliving every moment of the past few days. Caleb told about the confession, how Hannah had gotten it. Hannah told about Dixon grabbing her arm, the fear that he'd search her. Margaret described riding through the storm to reach the marshals, how she'd nearly been thrown from her horse twice. Billy hung on every word, his young face showing every emotion: fear, excitement, pride. Marcus asked practical questions about what would happen to Hale's land, his holdings. Tom just listened, nodding occasionally, his eyes on Hannah more than he probably realized. When Hannah finally set bowls of stew in front of them, everyone fell silent for a moment, just savoring food and warmth and safety. Then Tom raised his coffee cup. "To Hannah," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "The bravest damn woman in Wyoming territory." Hannah felt her cheeks heat. "I'm not—" "Yes, you are," Caleb interrupted, his eyes meeting hers across the table. "You walked into Hale's office when armed men were looking for you. You faced down a corrupt judge and got him to confess. You rode through a storm with federal marshals hunting for us. You saved all of us." The others raised their cups too. Billy lifted his milk. He was too young for anything stronger, though he always pretended otherwise. "To Hannah," they echoed. Hannah didn't know what to say. For so long she'd been invisible. The cook, the joke. The woman people looked past. Now 5 people were looking at her like she was a hero, and she didn't know how to hold that. "To all of us," she said finally, raising her own cup. "We did this together." They drank, and Hannah felt something warm settle in her chest. This was what family felt like. After dinner, everyone was too wired to sleep. They sat around the fire, and the stories started. Tom told about the time Caleb's brother had tried to break a wild Mustang and ended up in the water trough. Marcus shared a memory of his first cattle drive, when he'd been Billy's age and twice as cocky. Billy talked about growing up in St. Louis, how different the ranch was from city life. Hannah just listened, soaking it in. She'd never had this before. People who cared, who shared their lives with her. It felt precious, fragile, like if she breathed too hard it might disappear. Caleb caught her eye across the fire and smiled. Not his usual tight-lipped expression, but a real smile that reached his eyes. Hannah smiled back, and something passed between them. Understanding, gratitude, maybe more. Eventually people started drifting off to bed. Margaret took the spare room, moving slowly because of her injuries. The men headed to the bunkhouse, still talking excitedly. Hannah started cleaning up, but Caleb stopped her. "Leave it," he said. "You're exhausted." "So are you." "Yeah, but I didn't blackmail a judge today." Hannah laughed, actually laughed, and felt some of the tension drain from her shoulders. "Fair point." They stepped out onto the porch together, and the night air was cool and sweet. Stars blazed overhead, more than Hannah had ever seen in town. An owl called from somewhere in the distance. "Can't believe it's really over," Hannah said quietly. "Believe it." Caleb leaned against the porch railing. "Hale's done. His whole operation is falling apart. The marshals are already investigating everyone connected to him." "What about his men, the ones who got away during the ambush?" "They'll scatter. Without Hale's money, there's no reason for them to stick around." Caleb paused. "We'll stay vigilant for a while, just in case, but the worst is over." Hannah wanted to believe that, but something nagged at her. What if he gets out? What if he finds a way? "He won't." Caleb's voice was firm. "The evidence against him is overwhelming. Between Alcott's confession and the ledgers the marshals found in his office, he's done. He'll spend the rest of his life in prison." Hannah nodded, trying to let the reassurance sink in, but she couldn't quite shake the memory of Hale's face when the marshals arrested him, the cold fury in his eyes. "You're worried," Caleb said, reading her expression. "A little." He turned to face her fully. "Hannah, listen to me. You did something incredible. You stood up to a man who terrified everyone else. You got proof that brought him down. That took courage most people don't have." "Or stupidity," Caleb's mouth quirked. "Maybe both. But it worked. And now we get to live our lives without looking over our shoulders every minute." "I don't know how to do that," Hannah admitted. "I've been scared for so long, I don't remember what it feels like not to be." "Then we'll figure it out together." The simple certainty in his voice steadied her. Hannah looked out at the valley, at the land they'd fought for, and felt something shift inside her. "We should talk," she said, "about the deal." Caleb stiffened slightly. "All right. The year's almost up. The agreement was 1 year of marriage, then I'd be free to go. You'd give me money to start over somewhere else." "I remember." Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. Hannah took a breath. "I don't want the money." "Hannah, let me finish." She turned to face him. "I don't want the money, and I don't want to leave. I want to stay. But I need to know. Is that what you want too?" Caleb stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You want to stay?" "Yes. Even though the deal's almost up. Even though you could take the money and start fresh somewhere easier." "I don't want easier. I want this." Hannah gestured to the ranch, the valley. "I want to keep fighting for this place. Keep building something that matters." "Why?" The question was soft but intense. Hannah thought about it. "Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm not just surviving. I'm living. I matter here, to you, to Margaret, to Tom and Marcus and Billy. I have purpose, and I'm not ready to give that up." Caleb's face did something complicated. "You don't owe me anything, Hannah. You've more than fulfilled your end of the deal. You risked your life multiple times. You don't have to stay out of obligation." "I know. That's not why I want to stay." "Then why?" Hannah's heart was pounding. This was it, the moment to be honest, to put it all out there. Because somewhere along the way, this stopped being a transaction. Somewhere between the wedding and the fire and facing down Hale, this became real. You became real to me. And I hope, Maybe I became real to you too. Caleb was quiet for so long Hannah's stomach started to sink. Then he said, "You were always real to me. From the first day." "What?" "That day in town when I chose you, everyone thought I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. But when I looked at you, I saw someone who understood what it was like to be trapped, to feel like the world was crushing you and you had no way out." He paused. "I chose you because I thought we could survive together, but you became so much more than that." Hannah's throat was tight. "What am I now?" "Everything." The word was simple but carried weight. "You're my partner, my friend, the person I trust most in the world. And if you want to stay, not because of the deal, but because you want to, then yeah, that's what I want too." Relief flooded through Hannah so intensely her knees wobbled. "So I can stay?" "Stay as long as you want. Forever, if that's what you choose." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "Forever sounds good." Caleb's face broke into a smile, genuine and unguarded. He stepped closer and Hannah met him halfway. When they embraced, it felt different from the careful, polite distance they'd maintained for months. This was real, solid, right. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other under the stars. And Hannah felt something in her chest that she'd never felt before. Hope. Real, bone-deep hope for the future. The next morning, Margaret rode out early to survey her property. She came back at midday, her face grim. "It's bad," she said without preamble, dismounting stiffly. "The barn's completely gone. Just ash and some charred beams. The house has structural damage. Roof partially collapsed, windows blown out. It's salvageable, but it'll take months of work and more money than I have." Hannah felt a pang of guilt. "Margaret, I'm so sorry. If we hadn't asked you to help—" "Stop." Margaret's voice was sharp. "Hale did this, not you, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Some things are worth fighting for." Caleb came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "How bad?" "Bad enough that I can't live there while rebuilding. I'll need to find somewhere else to stay. Maybe board in town." "No," Caleb interrupted. "You'll stay here." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I'm not a charity case, Rourke." "Didn't say you were. But you're family, and family takes care of each other." The words seemed to hit Margaret hard. Her tough exterior cracked slightly. "Family," she repeated, testing it out. "Yeah. You rode through a storm to save us. You took a beating from Hale's men. You've stood by us through everything." Caleb's voice was firm. "That makes you family. So you stay here until your place is rebuilt. No arguments." Margaret looked like she wanted to argue anyway, but then her shoulders sagged. "All right. But I'm working for my keep. I'm not just going to sit around." Wouldn't expect anything less. True to her word, Margaret threw herself into ranch work. She was up before dawn every day, working alongside the men, refusing to let her healing injuries slow her down. She mended fences, helped with the cattle, even started training a new horse Tom had acquired. Hannah worried about her pushing too hard, but Margaret waved off her concerns. "Staying busy keeps me from thinking too much about what I lost." Hannah understood that. She'd been doing the same thing for months, keeping her hands occupied so her mind couldn't spiral. A week after Hale's arrest, a rider came to the ranch. He was dressed in a suit that had seen better days, carried a leather satchel, and introduced himself as Mr. Pemberton from the territorial office. "I'm here about compensation," he said when Caleb invited him into the house, "for damages incurred during Mr. Hale's illegal activities." They all gathered around the kitchen table: Caleb, Hannah, Margaret, even Tom and Marcus, who'd been nearby when Pemberton arrived. The territorial agent pulled out sheaves of paper covered in official-looking stamps. "The territorial government has seized all of Mr. Hale's assets," Pemberton explained, adjusting his spectacles. "His land holdings, his cattle, his cash reserves, his property in town. Everything. It's all being liquidated, and the proceeds will be distributed to victims of his crimes." Hannah felt her pulse quicken. "How much are we talking about?" Pemberton consulted his papers. For the Rourke Ranch, given the documented losses, burned pasture, killed cattle, property damage, emotional distress, we're estimating approximately $8,000. The room went silent. $8,000. Hannah had never seen that much money in her entire life. She'd worked for years at the boarding house and never earned more than a few dollars a month. Caleb's face was carefully neutral, but Hannah saw his hands tighten on the table. And the others, the Henderson family, the Pratts? Similar amounts, adjusted for their individual losses and the duration of harassment they endured. The Hendersons, who were forced off their land 2 years ago, will receive $10,000. The Pratts, $6,000. Everyone Mr. Hale forced out will have the option to buy back their land at pre-Hale prices, with additional compensation for improvements they made. What about me? Margaret asked quietly. Pemberton flipped through his papers, found the right page. Ah, yes. Miss Brennan, given the severity of the attack on your property, destroyed barn, killed livestock, physical assault, you're eligible for $12,000. Margaret made a sound like she'd been punched. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. 12,000. Yes, ma'am. The territory takes these matters seriously. What was done to you was criminal, and we're committed to making it right. Tom let out a low whistle. Marcus just shook his head in disbelief. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. For Margaret, who'd lost so much, and for all of them who'd fought so hard. Pemberton left papers for them to sign, promised the money would be available within 6 weeks, and rode away. For a long moment after he left, nobody spoke. They just sat there, processing. Then Margaret started laughing. It was a slightly hysterical sound, edged with tears. $12,000, she said again. I could rebuild 3 barns with that, buy a whole herd of horses. Hell, I could buy a new ranch. You could, Caleb agreed carefully. Is that what you want? Margaret looked at him, then at Hannah. I don't know what I want. I've been so focused on just surviving, on getting through each day, I haven't thought about what comes next. Then think about it now, Hannah said gently. What do you want, Margaret? Really want? Margaret was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I want to not be alone anymore. I've been alone for 5 years since my husband died, running that ranch by myself, fighting to keep it, never asking for help because I was too proud. She paused. But these past weeks, staying here, working with all of you, I realized I'm tired of doing everything alone. Caleb leaned forward. Then don't. Stay here. Pool our resources. Make this ranch bigger, stronger. We could expand into the north pasture, build a bigger barn, maybe even start breeding horses like you've always talked about. You're offering me a partnership? I'm offering you family. I already told you that. Caleb glanced at Hannah. Both of you. This ranch, it's too much for one person. My brother knew that. That's why he wanted to bring in more help before he died. But 3 of us? We could build something that'll last. Something real. Hannah felt warmth bloom in her chest. I'm in, if Margaret is. Margaret's eyes were wet. She swiped at them impatiently. You really mean it? Full partnership? Equal shares, Caleb confirmed. Decisions made together. Profits split 3 ways. And when you have kids, what then? Caleb blinked, clearly not having thought that far ahead. He looked at Hannah, who felt her cheeks heat. They hadn't discussed children, hadn't discussed making their marriage real in that way. We'll figure it out when we get there, Hannah said. But the partnership stands. Your family, Margaret. That doesn't change. Margaret looked between them, searching for doubt, for hidden agendas. But she must have found only sincerity because she nodded, her jaw tight with emotion. All right, she said. I'm in. Partners. They shook on it, all 3 of them clasping hands across the table. Tom and Marcus witnessed it, grinning like they'd just watched history being made. And maybe they had. 3 weeks later, news came that sent shockwaves through the valley. Judge Alcott was dead. A writer brought word. The judge had been found in his study, an empty bottle of poison beside him, and a letter confessing to everything. The letter detailed years of corruption, every bribe he'd taken, every false ruling he'd made, every crime he'd helped cover up. It named names, gave dates, included amounts. Guilt got to him, Tom said when he heard. Hannah wasn't so sure. She remembered Alcott's face when she'd left his house, the hollow look in his eyes like he was already a ghost. He'd known his life was over the moment he signed that confession. The poison was just making it official. She felt a pang of something, not quite guilt, not quite pity, just sadness for a weak man who'd made terrible choices and paid the ultimate price. But Alcott's final letter did one good thing. It implicated a dozen more people in Hale's network. Within a week, arrests were being made across the territory. The Arat was being cut out, piece by piece. Sheriff Dixon was among those arrested. The marshals had found evidence in his office linking him to multiple crimes, accepting bribes, falsifying reports, participating in the attack on Margaret's ranch. He'd be standing trial alongside Hale. Red Hollow got a new sheriff, a federal marshal named Cooper, who'd been part of the group that arrested Hale. He was young, maybe 30, with honest eyes and a reputation for being incorruptible. His first act was cleaning out the sheriff's office and burning everything Dixon had left behind. "Fresh start," he told the town. "That's what we all need." People seemed to respond to that. There was a sense that maybe things could be different now, better. Hannah rode into town a month after Hale's arrest to pick up supplies. She was still wary, still half expecting hostility, but something had fundamentally shifted. Mrs. Peterson at the general store was almost obsequious in her friendliness. "Mrs. Rourke, how wonderful to see you. What can I get for you today?" Hannah handed over her list and waited while the woman bustled around gathering items. Other customers came and went, and Hannah noticed them watching her. But not with mockery or contempt. With something else. Respect? Curiosity? She couldn't quite name it. When Mrs. Peterson brought the wrapped packages to the counter, she leaned in conspiratorially. "I just want to say, what you did, standing up to Mr. Hale like that, it took real courage. We all should have done more to stop him years ago." Hannah looked at this woman who'd laughed at her during the forced wedding, who'd been part of the crowd that mocked her. "Yes," she said coolly. "You should have." Mrs. Peterson flushed. "I know we weren't kind to you. Some of us in town, we said things, did things we shouldn't have. And I want you to know I'm sorry for that." The apology was clumsy, obviously uncomfortable, but it was something. "Thank you," Hannah said simply. Outside, she nearly ran into Dahlia Kern, the red-haired woman who'd been in the marriage lineup, who'd looked at Caleb like he was already hers. Dahlia stopped short, her eyes sweeping over Hannah with an unreadable expression. "Mrs. Rourke?" "Miss Kern." They stood there for an awkward moment. Then Dahlia said, "I heard Hale's trial is scheduled for next month." "It is." "Will you testify?" "If they need me to, yes." Dahlia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I underestimated you. We all did." "Yes, you did. I won't make that mistake again." Dahlia's smile was thin, more grimace than warmth. "Congratulations on your partnership with Caleb and Miss Brennan. Quite the power alliance you've built." News traveled fast in small communities. "Thank you," Hannah said neutrally. Dahlia studied her for another moment, then walked away, her back straight and proud. Hannah watched her go and felt nothing. No anger, no triumph, just indifference. She loaded her supplies onto the wagon and headed home. The valley spread out before her, green and peaceful, and Hannah felt something loosen in her chest. This was her home now, her land, her life, and no one could take that away. The trial started 6 weeks later, and it was the biggest spectacle the territory had seen in years. Hannah, Caleb, and Margaret rode to the Capitol together, joining a stream of other victims, witnesses, and curious onlookers. The courthouse was packed, standing room only, with people crowding the hallways and spilling out into the street. Victor Hale sat at the defendant's table, and prison had not been kind to him. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by plain prison clothes. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. But when those eyes found Hannah in the crowd, the hatred in them was still burning bright. She held his gaze steadily. She wasn't afraid anymore. The prosecutor was a formidable woman named Mrs. Fletcher, sharp-eyed, no-nonsense, with a reputation for never losing a case. Her opening statement was devastating, laying out years of corruption, intimidation, and violence. Victor Hale believed himself above the law, she told the jury. He believed his wealth and connections made him untouchable. Over the next several days, we will prove that he was wrong. The testimony went on for days. Witness after witness took the stand, each one adding another piece to the damning puzzle. People Hale had bribed, people he'd threatened, people whose lives he'd destroyed. The Hendersons testified about being forced off their land, about finding their cattle poisoned, about the midnight visit from Hale's men that left their son with a broken arm. The Pratts told about threats, about vandalism, about the fire that nearly killed Mrs. Pratt. Others came forward, people Hannah had never met, from all corners of the territory. A merchant in Red Hollow who'd refused to sell to Hale and found his store burned down. A rancher who'd spoken out against Hale's land grabs and mysteriously disappeared for 3 days, returning beaten and terrified. A young woman who'd rejected Hale's advances and found herself run out of town on false accusations. The list went on and on, each testimony built on the last, painting a picture of systematic corruption and violence spanning years. When it was Hannah's turn, she walked to the stand on trembling legs. The prosecutor smiled encouragingly. "Mrs. Rourke, please tell the court about the night of October 15th, the night you entered Mr. Hale's residence." Hannah took a breath and told the story. The party, the servants' entrance, sneaking upstairs while the guests were distracted, finding the office, seeing the ledgers, understanding what they meant. "And why did you do it?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. "Why risk your life to enter Mr. Hale's private office?" Hannah looked at the jury, 12 faces watching her with varying degrees of interest and skepticism. Then she looked at Hale, whose face was twisted with fury. "Because he was destroying people," she said clearly. "Good people. Families. He was taking their land, their livelihoods, their futures, and someone needed to stop him." "Were you afraid?" "Terrified." "But you did it anyway." "Yes." "Why?" Hannah thought about it. "Because being afraid doesn't mean you get to stop fighting. It just means you have to fight harder." Something shifted in the jury's expressions. She saw understanding, recognition. Hale's lawyer, a slick man named Pritchard with oiled hair and an expensive suit, tried to make her seem like a criminal during cross-examination. "Mrs. Rourke, you admit to breaking into my client's home?" "Yes." "To stealing his private documents?" "I took copies of illegal ledgers documenting crimes. That's not theft, it's evidence. Evidence you obtain through illegal means. Evidence that shows your client has been bribing officials, falsifying land claims, and covering up murder for years." Pritchard's smile thinned. "That's for the jury to decide. What I'm asking is whether you understand that your actions were criminal." "What I understand," Hannah said, her voice steady, "is that sometimes breaking the law is the only way to get justice when the people who are supposed to uphold it are corrupt." "So you believe you're above the law?" "No. But I believe Mr. Hale isn't, and I was willing to risk everything to prove it." Pritchard tried to shake her, to catch her in contradictions, to make her seem unstable or vindictive. But Hannah had lived through too much to be intimidated by a lawyer's tricks. She answered every question calmly, honestly. And when she stepped down, she caught Caleb's eye in the crowd. He nodded once, proud. The testimony continued. Margaret told about the attack on her ranch, about the beating she'd endured, about watching her barn burn. Her voice never wavered, but Hannah saw her hands shake. Caleb testified about his brother's death, about the evidence that suggested it wasn't an accident, about the marshal's investigation that had been mysteriously closed without conclusion. "Do you believe Mr. Hale was responsible for your brother's death?" Mrs. Fletcher asked. "Yes." "Why?" Caleb's jaw was tight. "Because my brother stood up to him, refused to sell our land, and 3 weeks later, he was dead. The marshal who investigated was on Hale's payroll. It doesn't take a genius to connect those dots." Pritchard objected, calling it speculation. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. The jury had heard. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Ledgers showing bribes, witness testimony, Alcott's posthumous confession, documents seized from Hale's office. Pritchard did his best, but he was drowning in facts he couldn't dispute. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. People cheered, cried, embraced. Hannah sat frozen, unable to quite believe it was real. Caleb grabbed her hand, squeezed so hard it hurt. Margaret was crying, not bothering to hide it. The judge banged his gavel for order. When the room finally quieted, he looked at Hale with contempt. "Mr. Hale, you have terrorized this territory for years. You have used your wealth and influence to corrupt our institutions, destroy families, and commit acts of violence with impunity. That ends today." He sentenced Hale to 20 years in territorial prison. Dixon got 10. The others received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years, depending on their level of involvement. As the marshals led Hale away, he twisted to look back at the courtroom. His eyes found Hannah one last time, and he mouthed something. She couldn't hear it over the noise, but she could read his lips. "This isn't over." A chill ran down her spine. But then Caleb stood, blocking her view, and Hale was gone. "It's over," Caleb said firmly. "He can rot in that cell for all I care." Hannah nodded, trying to believe it, but something about Hale's expression stayed with her, the cold certainty, like he knew something they didn't. She pushed the thought away. They'd won. That was what mattered. They rode home the next day, exhausted but triumphant. The valley had never looked more beautiful, green pastures stretching to the mountains, sky so blue it hurt to look at, clouds moving lazily overhead. When they arrived at the ranch, Tom had prepared a celebration. He'd somehow managed to acquire whiskey, and they all gathered in the yard as the sun set. Even Billy, who was too young to drink legally, got a small glass. Tom raised his cup. "To justice." "To new beginnings," Margaret added, her voice thick with emotion. "To family," Caleb said, looking at Hannah and Margaret. They drank, and Hannah felt warmth spread through her chest. This was what she'd been missing her whole life. This sense of belonging, of mattering, of being part of something bigger than herself. After dinner, people drifted off. Tom and Marcus to the bunkhouse, Billy to check on the horses, Margaret to her room. Caleb pulled Hannah aside. "Walk with me?" They strolled toward the pasture, the evening air cool and sweet. Neither spoke for a while, just enjoying the peace. Then Caleb stopped, turned to face her. "There's something I need to say." Hannah's stomach tightened. "All right." "This marriage, it started as a way to keep my land. A business arrangement. You agreed to help me, and I agreed to give you a fresh start after a year. I know. But it's not that anymore, not for me." Caleb took a breath. "I don't know when it changed. Maybe that night at Hale's party, when you walked out in that servant's dress, and I realized how brave you are. Maybe when you faced down Alcott and got that confession. Or maybe it was gradual, so slow I didn't notice until it was already done." Hannah's heart was pounding. "Caleb, let me finish." He ran a hand through his hair, looking more nervous than she'd ever seen him. "I love you, Hannah. I'm not good at saying things like this. I'm not romantic or smooth. But I love you, and I want this to be real. Not a business arrangement. A real marriage. If that's something you want too." The words hung in the air between them. Hannah stared at him, her mind racing. Love. He loved her. "You love me?" she whispered. "Yeah, I do." She thought about the past months, the fear, the fighting, the moments when she'd wanted to run but stayed because of him. The way he'd stood up for her in town, defending her against Dahlia's mockery. The way he'd looked at her after she got Alcott's confession, like she'd hung the moon. The way he made her feel seen, valued, important. "I love you too," she said, and felt tears spill down her cheeks. Caleb's face transformed, shock giving way to joy, giving way to relief. He pulled her close, and they kissed. Not like that first awkward peck after the fake wedding. This was deep, real, full of months of suppressed emotion finally breaking free. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying and laughing at the same time. "We should do this right," Caleb said. "Have a real wedding. With people who actually care about us, not a crowd of strangers laughing at us." Hannah wiped her eyes, smiling. "I'd like that. We'll invite the Hendersons, the Pratts, Margaret, and the men. Maybe some of the new settlers moving back into the valley." "Not the town?" Caleb shook his head firmly. "Just the people who matter, the people who stood by us." Hannah thought about Dahlia's sneer, Mrs. Peterson's late apologies, all the people who'd mocked her then tried to make nice once she'd proven useful. "Just the people who matter," she agreed. They set the wedding for 6 weeks later, giving time for the compensation money to arrive and for Margaret to make real progress on rebuilding her barn. The money came exactly when Pemberton had promised. $8,000 for Hannah and Caleb, $12,000 for Margaret. It arrived in bank drafts that they had to take to Red Hollow to cash, under the watchful eye of Sheriff Cooper and 2 deputies. Standing in the bank with more money than she'd ever imagined, Hannah felt dizzy. "This is real," she said. "It's real," Caleb confirmed. "What are we going to do with it all?" They discussed it over the past weeks, planning and arguing and revising. Half goes to expanding the ranch, Caleb said. New cattle, better equipment, maybe hiring another hand or two. Quarter goes to savings for emergencies. And the rest, he looked at Hannah. The rest is yours, to do whatever you want with. Mine? You earned it, more than earned it. You risked everything to bring Hale down. That money is yours. Hannah stared at this bank draft in her hands. $2,000. More money than she'd make in 10 years of cooking at the boarding house. Freedom, in paper form. I want to invest it in the ranch, she said. In our future, all of it. Caleb looked surprised. Hannah, you don't have to. I want to. This is my home now, my life. I want to build it into something that'll last. Caleb studied her face, then nodded. All right. Partners? Hannah smiled. Partners. Margaret, when she received her money, stood in the bank and cried. Not sad tears, but overwhelmed ones. I can rebuild, she said. I can actually rebuild everything I lost. But instead of immediately hiring builders, she did something unexpected. She bought the property adjacent to the Rourke Ranch, 50 acres that had belonged to a family Hale had driven out. Then she approached Caleb and Hannah with a proposal. I want to merge our operations, she said. My land and yours work together. We build one big barn that serves both properties. Share equipment, share labor. Build something that can weather anything. Caleb didn't hesitate. Yes. So they began the work. With the compensation money, they hired builders, men from Red Hollow, who needed work now that Hale's construction projects had dried up. They broke ground on a new barn that would be the biggest in the valley. They bought cattle, good breeding stock that would improve their herds. They repaired fences, dug a new well, built a smokehouse for preserving meat. The ranch transformed. What had been a struggling operation became something impressive. People riding past would stop to stare at the new barn rising against the sky, at the healthy cattle grazing in expanded pastures. And through it all, Hannah worked alongside Caleb and Margaret. Not as a cook or housekeeper, but as a full partner. She helped drive fence posts, even though her hands blistered. She learned to rope cattle, even though she fell off her horse more times than she could count. She negotiated prices with suppliers, even though her voice shook at first. She became someone she'd never imagined being, strong, capable, confident. The wedding was held on a perfect late summer day when the sky was impossibly blue and the wind was gentle for once. They held it in the yard of the ranch with the new barn as a backdrop. Margaret officiated, reading from a worn book of poetry and looking almost uncomfortable in a dress. The Hendersons came, bringing their 3 children. The Pratts arrived with fresh-baked bread. Tom, Marcus, and Billy stood up front in their best shirts, grinning like they'd won something. A few others came too, new settlers who'd moved back into the valley now that Hale was gone, people who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of the celebration. Maybe 30 people total. Small, but that made it better. Hannah wore a dress she'd sewn herself. Nothing fancy, but clean and pretty, with blue thread embroidered at the cuffs that matched Caleb's eyes. Caleb wore his best shirt and looked uncomfortable but happy, his hair slicked back and his boots polished. When Margaret asked if they took each other, there was no hesitation this time. No crowd of strangers laughing, just friends and family who genuinely cared. I do, Caleb said, his voice strong and sure. I do, Hannah echoed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. And when they kissed, the small crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Afterward, they ate in the yard, roasted beef that Tom had been cooking since dawn, fresh bread, vegetables from the garden they'd planted together. The Hendersons brought music, a fiddle, and a guitar, and someone started playing. People danced. Even Hannah, who'd never learned proper steps, let Billy twirl her around until she was dizzy and laughing. Then Marcus asked, surprisingly graceful despite his size. Then Tom, who turned out to be an excellent dancer despite his rough exterior. Then Caleb cut in, pulling her close as the music slowed. They swayed together, and Caleb leaned down to whisper in her ear. Happy? So happy I could burst. No regrets? Hannah looked up at him, at this man who'd chosen her when no one else would have, who'd fought beside her, who'd loved her when she couldn't love herself. Not one single regret. As the sun set and stars began to appear, Hannah stood on the porch of her home, not borrowed, not temporary, but truly hers. and looked at the life she'd built. The barn stood solid against the darkening sky. Cattle grazed peacefully in the pastures. Music and laughter drifted from the yard where people who mattered celebrated with her. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "About how far we've come. How different everything is from a year ago." "Different good or different bad?" Hannah leaned back against him. "Different perfect." Time continued its relentless march. Summer turned to fall, leaves changing colors, and the air growing crisp. Fall turned to winter, snow blanketing the valley in white silence. Winter gave way to spring, everything bursting back to life. Through it all, the ranch prospered. Their cattle multiplied, their reputation grew. People started coming to them for advice, for help settling disputes, for guidance on everything from land claims to water rights. Caleb's name was mentioned for county commissioner. At first he dismissed it, but Hannah and Margaret pushed him. "The valley needs someone honest," Margaret said. "Someone who'll stand up to the next person who tries to be like Hale." "And that someone is you," Hannah added. So Caleb ran. His campaign was simple: honesty, fairness, standing up for the small rancher against big money interests. He won in a landslide. Hannah was proud of him. But she was also proud of herself, because she'd found her own role in the community. People came to her when they needed mediation in disputes. Women sought her out for advice, for support, for friendship. The invisible cook had become someone the valley relied on. 2 years after Hale's arrest, Hannah sat on the porch watching another sunset and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt afraid. Real, bone-deep fear. It had been months, maybe longer. She'd stopped looking over her shoulder, stopped waiting for disaster, stopped expecting betrayal. She'd learned to trust, to hope, to believe in good things. Margaret came out and sat beside her, moving a little slower these days. Her injuries from Hale's men had left her with aches that flared up when the weather changed. "Penny for your thoughts," Margaret said, "just thinking about how much has changed. For the better?" "Definitely for the better." They sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd survived hell and come out stronger. Then Margaret said, "I got a letter today from my sister in Kansas. She wants to visit." "That's good, isn't it?" "I think so. We haven't spoken in 10 years, not since I married and moved out here." Margaret paused. "She said she heard about what happened with Hale. Said she's proud of me." Hannah heard the emotion in Margaret's voice. "You should be proud of yourself too." "I am. For the first time in my life, I actually am." Caleb came home that evening from a commissioner meeting in town, looking tired but satisfied. "Council voted to build a new school, and they want to name it after my brother." Hannah's breath caught. "Caleb, that's wonderful." "Yeah." His voice was rough with emotion. "Yeah, it is." They sat together that night, the three of them, Caleb, Hannah, and Margaret, talking about everything and nothing, planning for spring planting, arguing good-naturedly about which cattle to breed, making jokes that only they understood. Family. Real family. 3 years turned to 4, 4 to 5. The ranch continued to grow, the partnership solidified, the valley thrived. Hannah kept cooking, but now it was for gatherings, community dinners, celebrations, holidays. She fed people not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because feeding people was how she showed love. She never forgot where she came from, the boarding house, the mockery, the years of being invisible. But she didn't let those memories define her anymore. She'd learned something important in those hard years fighting Hale, fighting for the ranch, fighting for her place in the world. Strength wasn't about being perfect. It was about getting back up when life knocked you down. It was about standing your ground when everyone told you to run. It was about choosing courage even when you were terrified. And love, real love, wasn't about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about showing up every day, about choosing each other when things got hard, about building something together that was stronger than either person alone. One morning, 7 years after that forced wedding in Red Hollow, Hannah woke before dawn and slipped out of bed without waking Caleb. She made coffee, wrapped herself in a shawl, and went out to watch the sunrise. The valley spread out before her, golden light touching everything. The barn they'd built together, the cattle grazing peacefully, the mountains standing eternal in the distance. She thought about the girl she'd been 7 years ago, scared, invisible, convinced she was worthless. That girl was gone. In her place stood a woman who'd faced down criminals, who'd helped bring justice to a corrupt system, who'd built a life worth fighting for. Hannah Rourke. Wife. Partner. Pillar of the community. Undeniable. Caleb came out and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep. Too grateful." He smiled and pulled her close. They stood together watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, and Hannah felt complete peace. She'd come to this valley expecting to hide, to survive quietly for a year and then disappear. Instead, she'd found courage, purpose, love, home. The invisible woman had become someone who mattered, someone people looked to, someone who'd changed the course of an entire community. And she'd done it not by being perfect, but by being brave, by refusing to stay small, by fighting for what mattered. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For choosing me, that day in town. For seeing something in me I couldn't see in myself." Caleb kissed her temple. "I chose right. Never doubted that for a second. Neither have I." As the sun rose fully, bathing the valley in warm light, Hannah felt the last piece of fear fall away. She was safe, loved, home, and nothing, not Hale's lingering threats, not the harsh Wyoming frontier, not the memories of who she used to be, could diminish her again. She was Hannah Rourke, and she was finally, completely, beautifully free. The end.